the start of a ceasefire which aims to put Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza on hold for at least 6 weeks, potentially even for longer, as well as silencing the bullets and the bombs, the rockets and the missiles. One of the crucial elements of this truce is the exchange of more hostages being held by militants for Palestinian detainees that are currently in Israeli jails. Now, 3 women aged between 24 and 31 have become the first hostages to be freed. And these pictures show them being reunited with their mothers at a hospital where they will undergo medical evaluation and debriefing. One of the women lost 2 fingers during the October 7th attack in 2023 that launched this war. Those 3 Israeli women were airlifted to the hospital from the border with Gaza, the Israeli military receiving them from the Red Cross and the officials there who had acted as the intermediaries in the handover from Hamas. An excited crowd of family members and supporters were on hand to see the trio's arrival at the medical facility.
Super excitement. I was able to touch her for a few seconds and to hear her voice saying, I love you. And I managed to tell her how much I love her and hold her hand for a few seconds and to see she's okay. And there's no words to describe what I'm feeling right now.
The other part of the ceasefire deal involves the release of the Palestinians who have been detained by the Israelis. Now, this was the scene at a prison in the West Bank earlier today. Buses pulling up to the main gate to carry dozens of women and children to freedom. They are part of a larger group of almost 800 being released over the first phase of the ceasefire, running those 42 days that I mentioned off the top. Now, let's get further perspective from someone we've been talking to over the course of the day. We've once again reached Dave Harden in Westminster, Maryland. He's a former senior advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama's special envoy for Middle East peace, and he's a former director for the U.S. Agency for International Development in the West Bank and Gaza. Dave, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
Dave, we're into the 10 o'clock hour in the evening in Gaza and in Israel. And first day down, what do you make of how we've done on this first day?
I mean, the stories are heartbreaking, that's for sure, right? Both the hostages and their families and the Gazans who are finally going to get some relief. All of that is a great joy. But there are some red flags that I worry about. Number one is the prominent public role of Hamas in this hostage exchange and the signaling that they have given to not only the Israelis, the Palestinians, but the world, that they are still in control. And the second red flag that I worry about is kind of the reaffirmation by Netanyahu that this is just a temporary ceasefire and the war can continue. So my guess is that over the next 6 weeks, this milestone-based ceasefire will allow the hostages to return and allow aid to surge into Gaza. Beyond that, it's not clear.
What's your anticipation then, based on all the factors at play?
Starting on the Israeli side, there's big divisions within the Netanyahu coalition, and you've seen already some defections and some opposition to the ceasefire deal. I think that will only deepen if Netanyahu doesn't reactivate the war at the 42-day mark or at any time that they feel like there's been a Hamas breach. That will still leave more than 60 hostages in Hamas's control, but it's clear that the Israelis have not achieved one of their core war aims, which was the total and utter defeat of Hamas, which is probably impossible anyway, but that was one of their core war aims. Hamas probably has the equal number of fighters that they had at the start of the war, although seriously less capable military strengths.
You talked about the heartbreak of this day. I mean, we saw those 3 young women being released by Hamas with, as you said, the wall of Hamas fighters. I mean, it was jarring, and they were screaming in the streets, and these 3 young women are being ushered in by the Red Cross. They're now at the medical facilities. We see these beautiful images of them being embraced by their mothers. And, you know, these just universal emotions of a family reunion after a long time being separated, especially under such dire conditions. Those are wonderful images, Dave, but what happens when we start seeing bodies coming back to Israel? Go ahead.
Great point. Let me just unpack one of the things that you said, and that's the role of the Red Cross or the ICRC. That is an enormously complicated job. They have to go into harm's way, even though there's a ceasefire. Ceasefires can break at any point, and there's always rejectionists, right? And so these ICRC folks go in to get the hostages amid all that chaos and bring them back. So special thank you to ICRC, who, by the way, had gotten a lot of criticism, particularly on the Israeli side, early on in the war. The images of the mothers meeting their daughters after being held hostage for 15 months is heartwarming, and it does give us hope. It does show us that there's a possibility of a way forward that is more inspiring. But the question is will we get there? And that remains unresolved. I will just add, on the Hamas side, Hamas is the sole power in Gaza at the moment. The Palestinian Authority is not there. There are no international peacekeepers. There's no regional peacekeepers. There's nobody but Hamas themselves, either keeping law and order or not, but certainly asserting control over the entire Gaza Strip.
So what needs to be done then? Because this just can't keep going. I mean, it seems to me this can't keep going the way it is. Hamas continuing to maintain its power, or we keep cycling through this series of wars and loss of life and turmoil again and again and again. What is the solution to this? And I know that's a gigantic question, Dave, but if you had your way, what happens?
Well, Natasha, I really value your sentiment because that was mine for a very long time. I used to think if we only worked a little bit harder, if we were a little bit smarter, we could help the parties get together and have a two-state solution, which is honestly the only way really forward. And it's very, very, very remote. In the immediate term, what has to happen is that the aid has to surge in to Gaza, food, water, medicines, fuel, that will help kind of resupply that deficit. But reconstruction will not begin during this time. Rebuilding will not begin during this time. The Israelis control all access points in. This is, from their perspective, still a temporary order, temporary ceasefire. And so, there's going to be tough days ahead. What we do hope for is that sometime during these 42 days, they will begin to negotiate the next round of what a ceasefire could look like. And there is incentives for that to happen, given the fact that Hamas needs the aid and they still have the hostages and the Israelis want them home.
Dave Harden, always good to talk to you. We got hopefully 6 more weeks of this first phase and then 2 more phases to go, and then God knows where we go from here. But I hope you'll join us again and give us more of your analysis.
Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
Take care, sir.
Yeah.
Family members of the hostages released today say they are relieved and grateful for the return. And among them is Canadian Maureen Leshem. Her cousin, Romy Gonen, was among the 3 women who was freed today. Leshem said she's grateful her cousin has been reunited with her family, but she knows there will be a long road to recovery.
We know that the Romy who is returning to us is not the same vibrant, joyful young lady who was stolen from us on October 7th. We will need to get to know a new version of Romy, and that breaks my heart. She has been subjected to incomprehensible cruelty and trauma, more than we can possibly fathom. But we are ready for what lies ahead. This moment is not an end, it's a beginning. And today, we begin the hard work of helping Romy heal and rediscover herself, a daunting but essential task that we, as her family and community, are prepared to face together. This is an extraordinary moment that proves each of us have the power to stand up against injustice, against all odds.
That was Canadian Maureen Lashem speaking about the release of her cousin Romy Gonen from the custody of Hamas earlier today.